Welcome to Vintage Variety. Today's content is going to be part show and tell and part vintage jewelry information. I'm going to be showing you a lot of different jewelry items from my personal collection. I'm going to talk about some of the designers, the construction methods, and what you need to be aware of and look out for when you're purchasing items online. A lot of the information I'm going to share with you guys today, you may already know, especially if you've been collecting for quite some time. But if you're new to collecting, I feel like this is pretty important information to pass along, especially if you purchase items online. The first pieces that I'm going to show you today are pieces by Miriam Haskell. All of these pieces are signed. I do not have a huge collection of Haskell, mainly because it's so expensive and so hard to come by, but I am going to show you a few of the pieces that I own. Most collectors already know this information, but a lot of Miriam Haskell's earliest pieces were unsigned. So that's something to keep in mind. Is it possible to find a piece of Miriam Haskell jewelry that's unsigned? I believe that it is, but I think that the majority of them are going to be in private collections. It's also kind of hard to identify some of the pieces because a lot of these old designers did a lot of similar types of work. One thing that you will often encounter with Miriam Haskell jewelry, and this is not all of her pieces, but many of her pieces used brass stampings, including the brass filigree stampings like you see on this brooch. When I say filigree stampings, this is a very good example. This is a very simple Miriam Haskell brooch. I'm going to flip this around and show you the marking on the back of it because all of these pieces that I am going to show you today are signed. And there's the marking on this one, Miriam Haskell. This is a simple design compared to some of her pieces that were more elaborate. She would use these filigree stampings along with other elements to create a layered look. As you can see here in this locket, they've taken this and they've wired lots of other tiny pieces on, such as leaves. They've also added this beautiful Baroque pearl, which she was well known for, in the center, and they've surrounded it with lots of other pearls. All of these pieces have been wired on to a piece of filigree, and that filigree has been attached to the front of this brooch. By the way, the chain on this necklace pendant isn't original. I added it so I would be able to wear it. I'm going to give you guys a really close look at it. This is just a beautiful piece of craftsmanship, as many of her pieces were. Another thing that you will notice about her Baroque pearls is they're very shiny and luminous. They were coated with fish scales to give them that look. I'm going to open this up so you guys can see the inside. I don't have any pictures inside of it, but this one's in really good condition, and I could easily put some photographs in there. So this is one of my most treasured pieces of Miriam Haskell because I feel like it's a very good example of her work. And you can see that someone spent a lot of time wiring all of these pieces on here. Usually, if this would not have been a locket, it would have been just a regular necklace or something along those lines. What they would do is they would cover up the back piece of filigree with another one to hide all of that wiring that they had done on the piece. And the pieces were done so immaculately well that you could hardly even see any wiring anywhere on them. So I wanted to show this as a really good example of the technique that she used. And this technique of wiring all of these pieces onto a piece of filigree or even a piece of punctured plastic or metal was called cage work beadery. This method of making jewelry using cage work beadery and brass stampings was not specific to Haskell. A lot of other designers used these methods, and I will show you some examples later on in the content. Here on the pendant of this necklace, you can once again see that a brass stamping has been used. And then on the closure of this necklace, they've used a small piece of filigree, and all of these tiny pieces have been wired on to give it a very higher-end ornate look. If you're interested in Miriam Haskell jewelry and it's something you want to learn more about and learn how to authenticate, I highly recommend the book if you can afford it. If not, I recommend joining groups that identify Haskell pieces and studying pieces that have been authenticated, because often when you're online, you'll see pieces listed as an unsigned Haskell piece when that's really not the case. A lot of those pieces could have been made in Japan out of cheaper quality materials, so that is something really important to keep in mind. I've inserted an example on the screen for you guys to see. This is a piece that was listed as an early unsigned Miriam Haskell. And looking at the pictures of it, you can tell that the pieces have been wired on, but then when you look at the back, you automatically know that there's no way that this piece was by Haskell. Another great thing about owning the Miriam Haskell book is it does talk a lot about her construction methods and about the types of closures that would have been used on necklaces, bracelets, and things like that. These Miriam Haskell earrings are another example of a piece being wired on to filigree. And you can see here at the side where they've taken two pieces of filigree, one for wiring the piece on and another to cover up all of that wire work. The majority of these brass filigree stampings came out of Czechoslovakia, and this was before World War II. So that's something else to keep in mind. Many of those pieces were imported, and a lot of different jewelry makers used them. Haskell began her jewelry business in the 1920s, and one of the main designers that worked with her was Frank Hess. So a lot of times you'll see pieces listed online as Haskell from the Hess era, and that's what they're talking about. They're talking about the era that Miriam Haskell and Frank Hess were working together. There is a rumor that Frank Hess did the majority of the designs. Whether that's true or not, I don't know, but when you see a piece listed as a signed Miriam Haskell from the Hess era, you'll know exactly what it means. This is another example, and you can see these earrings do have the filigree pieces on the back, and the front pieces have been wired on. Speaking of Frank Hess, he did work one-on-one with Miriam Haskell. He was with her in the early years, and he continued to work for her company long after Miriam Haskell was no longer a part of it. After World War II, Miriam Haskell had some sort of a mental breakdown, so her brothers took over control of the company, and by 1950, she was no longer involved. This is another example of a signed Miriam Haskell piece, and this is a bracelet. It is done on a large piece of filigree with holes in it, and all of these pieces have been wire wrapped around the bracelet. Another rumor that is highly inaccurate that's been floating around forever is that Robert jewelry was Haskell jewelry, or that Robert was a designer for Miriam Haskell. Often you'll see listings that say original by Robert, Haskell designer, or you'll see Robert Haskell era. And guys, when you see this is just misinformation that's been floating around, and it's passed from one person to another. I've put a few examples up on the screen for you guys to see, and you'll see this quite often when you're shopping online. It will say Robert from the Haskell era, Robert designer for Haskell, or my favorite is Robert Haskell. So I'm going to take a few minutes to explain. There was a designer that worked for Miriam Haskell's company, and his name was Robert Clark. Robert Clark joined the Haskell company long after Miriam Haskell was no longer a part of it, and it was ran by her brothers. He joined the company as a designer in 1958, and he was never associated in any way with Originals by Robert jewelry. So keep that information in mind, because I'm going to get into some background information on Originals by Robert. I'm going to show you some examples, and at least one example that is very similar to a style that would have been done by Haskell. Another thing that I want to stress and be very clear on is I'm not calling out any resellers. I think that a lot of people that post listings along those lines, it's either because they've been misinformed or they're just hazarding a guess as to who the piece may be by, especially if it's an unsigned piece. This beautiful necklace that you see here is another really good example of cage work beadery. You can see that all of these pieces have been wired on to a piece of filigree, and another piece of filigree has been used on the back of this piece to hide the wire work. I know someone is probably going to comment, this necklace has some discoloration. It's also missing a rhinestone. This is a very old necklace. It's been in my collection for many years. It did have a case of verdigris, so some of the bead caps are going to be discolored. It has been treated, but I think that eventually I do need to do some serious repairs on this necklace. Maybe take it apart, restring it, and replace the bead caps and that missing rhinestone that I've never quite gotten around to. This necklace has a hook closure and it's somewhat ornate. It's done with filigree stampings, and the stampings have little tiny pieces that have been wired onto them to look more decorative. I do want to point out that this necklace is not signed. It's not signed on the hook at the back of the necklace or anywhere else. The reason I know this necklace is an original by Robert is because the earrings came with it, and the earrings are signed Robert on the back. A lot of older sets of jewelry came that way. Sometimes the necklace would be signed and the earrings wouldn't, or vice versa. Often when you run across these pieces out in a thrift store or at an antique store, you may find pieces that look very ornate and it looks like a specific designer, but it's not signed. And that's probably because they were part of a set, or like the old Haskell pieces, they may have came with a paper tag on them. Original by Robert is a company that was started in 1942 by 3 different men. The names of these 3 men were Robert Levy, David Jaffe, and Irvin Landsman. So you can see that the Robert that was involved in this company did not even have the same last name as the Robert that eventually ended up working for Miriam Haskell's company. You can see that this brooch is signed on the back, original by Robert, and that the earrings are simply just signed Robert. The company's original name was Fashion Craft, and you still can run across pieces of jewelry that are stamped that way. I'm not sure if this is true or not, or maybe it's just a rumor, but I've heard that they were using the name Fashion Craft and Robert interchangeably on some of their pieces of jewelry up until they officially changed the name of the company to Original by Robert. The company's name was officially changed in 1960. So that's some really good information to keep in mind when you run across those listings for Robert Haskell or Robert Haskell Designer. Just keep that in mind, that it's just inaccurate information that's gotten spread around over the years, and people have heard it and they just take it to be true automatically without doing a little bit of research on their own. I mentioned earlier that the majority of these brass stampings were made in Czechoslovakia. Not only were they imported into the United States and used here in making jewelry, but a lot of Czech jewelry incorporated these pieces also. This is a very good example of that. This is an old Czech brooch, and it's made from a brass stamping. It has all of these beautiful rhinestones set into it. So this stamping was probably made with the settings in it already, rather than being layered like the Haskell or the Robert pieces that I showed you earlier. This is another example. This is a very old brooch from Czechoslovakia, and again you can see that it's made from a filigree stamping, and it was made so that the center cabochon could just be set down into it. If you've been collecting for a while, you've probably seen these pieces, and of course, you've most likely heard of the Niger brothers. This is another example of a beautiful Czech necklace. This one's done in a silver tone, but you can see that this is made out of filigree stampings, and it does have that somewhat layered look to it. Of course, the difference with this piece is that there is no cage work beadery going on. There's no pieces that have been wired on. This is a different combination. These are pieces that have most likely been layered together and then attached. Another example that I wanted to show you guys from my collection is this beautiful brooch. This one is very old and you can't see it, but it is stamped Czechoslovakia on the actual stem of the pin. Much like the Miriam Haskell pieces or pieces that have that look, people will see pieces like these that I've just shown you and they'll automatically assume that they were by the Niger brothers, when unless you've studied that jewelry and you've learned how to identify it, there's really no way to verify that as being true. So that's something else to keep an eye out for. A lot of different jewelry makers and jewelry designers did use these stampings like this. You can still buy these brass jewelry stampings today. Just in case that style of jewelry is something you would be interested in learning how to make, you would need some pieces like these. And these are new pieces that I bought sometime back online. These are thin brass filigree stampings. And if you were going to practice or try to learn how to do cagework beadery, you would need a couple of pieces like this. One piece would have all of your elements wired onto it, and then another piece would go onto the back to cover up all of the wire work that you have done. One thing to always keep an eye out for is how thin these pieces are. You can see that this is very thin and it's also very pliable. And these are pretty much the same kind of pieces that were used in the really old pieces of jewelry. This brooch has a very similar look to it, but look how much thicker this is. And when you look on the back, you can tell this piece wasn't stamped, it was molded. So that is a big difference. Even though this brooch is still vintage, it's not quite that old. So this couldn't be called anything along the lines of Czechoslovakia or Czech made. Here is a few more examples. These are also stampings, brass stampings, and here is another bag of them. So all of these are the kind of elements that Haskell would have used. This, however, is much more modern. I purchased this at a hobby store, and although these butterflies have that filigree look, you can see how much thicker the material is. These earrings are a few more items I wanted to show you guys that really do have kind of a Haskell look to them. You can see that these have these pearls on them that are really trying to look Baroque, and they're very lightweight compared to a Haskell pearl, and they're not quite as shiny. The back has a filigree stamping, but the construction method is a lot different. This has pieces that was made onto the stamping, and the pearls are just hooked to that piece, so this isn't really wired on. Regardless, I think they're beautiful. I love them. I don't care that they're not a Haskell. But if you're picky about things like that, or if you see an item where they're asking a really big price and it's not signed, I would always think twice before I purchased it. These, I'm not sure who made them. They say patent pending on the back of the earring, but otherwise they aren't signed. I think these are really pretty also, and they do have the filigree elements, and the pearls on them, which are very lightweight plastic, are trying very hard to look Baroque. These I would not hesitate to wear. I think they're absolutely gorgeous earrings, but this is another example of something that could easily be mistaken as being a piece that was by Haskell or originals by Robert. You'll notice the back of these is different. It's not a filigree piece, it's a piece that's been pierced. And Haskell did have pieces like this in her jewelry. In fact, there was a period where she wasn't getting the brass stampings and she was using pieces of pierced plastic. Here's another pair of earrings. These are probably from a much later date, probably the 1950s or 60s. But again, they do have that filigree look to the back of them, the brass stampings. These are very lightweight. They have plastic cabochons. And if I had to hazard a guess, I would say that these were probably made in Japan. Just a few more pieces I want to show you guys because after all, I did say today's content was part information and part show and tell. This is another really beautiful necklace from my collection, and I absolutely love this one. I do need to get around to restringing it because the stringing material is rather loose. This is done with this beautiful glass cabochon in the center of it, and cagework beadery, just like Haskell would have used, has been incorporated into this necklace. Again, I don't believe this is a Haskell. I have no idea who made this necklace. Regardless, I think it's a gorgeous piece of jewelry. The beads on this necklace are also glass, and I'm going to show you the closure. You can see that it's not really ornate. It's just a simple hook closure. And of course, as I've already mentioned, it's not signed anywhere on the closure. Let's take a look at the front of this necklace again. You can see how it has all these different elements. Well, the majority of those have been wired on, and you can see that the front piece is a stamping. And then on the back piece, they've used a pierced piece of brass to cover up the majority of the wiring. You can still see some of the wiring around the edges, which is not something that you will usually see in pieces that were done by Haskell. I also have the matching earrings that go with this necklace, and you can see that they also have the same construction method. The back is a piece of filigree, although the back has been glued onto these, and you can see all the wiring that's been done. Much like the necklace, these earrings also aren't signed, and I'm pretty sure that someone made them. They probably came with a paper tag on them, but I really have no idea who made these earrings. This beautiful necklace is another example that I wanted to show you guys, and this is very well made. You can hardly see the wiring. You can see where they've capped the back of it with this round piece of filigree. This one has a large center stone set into it, or a cabochon. The other elements have been wired onto the front of the necklace. I'll show you here so you can get a really good look at it. This one is a double strand. All of these beads are glass beads, and even the clasp on the back of it is very ornate, and it's just really beautiful filigree work. You can see how they've also done the cage work beadery detail on this piece. And this necklace is signed Japan. So this is one of those really good high quality Japan pieces that I have talked about probably way back in the past that you can often run across. A few more pieces from my collection to share with you guys, and these are all going to be Czech pieces. This beautiful necklace has been confirmed by a group that I joined a few years back as being by the Niger brothers. But I wanted to show you this as an example. To me, I think it's beautiful regardless of who made it. There were so many beautiful pieces of jewelry that came out of Czechoslovakia during the time of the Niger brothers that I feel like all of it is well worth collecting. Here are a few more pieces that I've laid out that I want to show you guys. The necklace that I'm holding in my hand, I don't necessarily think that this is a piece that is Czech, but regardless, I think it is a beautiful piece of jewelry. Out of all of these pieces in front of you, my favorite is the necklace with the woman's picture on the front. I love jewelry like this. Other types of jewelry that you will see that have that look are pieces that were made in Western Germany. This is a necklace and earring set that I thrifted, believe it or not, quite some years ago, and I think it's absolutely beautiful. I do believe, yeah, there it is. There's the marking, Western Germany. So that's something else to keep in mind, that pieces like this, they weren't just made in Czechoslovakia or even in the United States. There were pieces that were also made in Western Germany. Again, you can see that this is a filigree stamping, and rather than everything being wired on, this was made with the settings already attached to it so that the stones could just be put in. I have a few more Western Germany pieces that I want to show you guys. This is a beautiful necklace, and once again you can see that it's made out of these beautiful brass stampings. The marking on this one is located on the hook closure. And then the last item are these beautiful earrings. These were also made in Western Germany, and again you can see that they have that filigree look. They are made out of brass stampings. I really enjoyed being able to share these pieces of jewelry from my personal collection with you guys, and I hope that the information I shared will be helpful to some of you. If you enjoyed this content, please remember to give me a thumbs up, and if you haven't already, please consider subscribing to my channel. Ring the bell for notifications so you'll be notified anytime I upload new content. Thank you again for watching, and I hope you all have a wonderful day.